now we're going back to the estuary. The next speaker, Barry Clark, is going to talk about the ecological health and management requirements of the Onrus estuary. Barry is a director of the environmental consultancy firm, the Anchor Environmental Consultants, and a research associate at the University of Cape Town. As a consultant, he's been concerned primarily with conservation planning, monitoring, and assessment of human impacts on estuaries, and rocky shores, sandy beaches, mangroves, and the coral reef ecosystems, as well as coastal and littoral zone processes. Barry?
Good morning, everyone. We're going a bit further downstream now. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the Onrus estuary and the work that I've done here, or the involvement I've had in the Onrus estuary. Firstly, just to tell you a bit about what I know about the estuary. It's what we call a temporary closed estuary, open to the sea part of the time, closed to the sea part of the time. So sometimes it's getting flushed by the sea, sometimes not. And it's one of 21 estuaries of this kind in what we call the warm temperate biogeographic region between Cape Point and the Wild Coast. Onrus is a fairly small estuary. It's got a modest floodplain. The entire estuary in size is about 15 hectares, which includes everything up to the 5-meter contour around the estuary, which we call the estuarine functional zone. And it's only 1.5 kilometers long. So as far as the estuary is concerned, it is small. It's, from an ecological conservation importance point of view, it's not hugely important, I'm sorry to say. It ranks, well, when we did an evaluation of all the estuaries in the country, it received a ranking of 94 out of the 279 estuaries in the country. So, and more recently, National Biodiversity Assessment gave it an importance score of low to average importance. And they also determined that it's not particularly important as a fish nursery area. So why do we care about it? Well, I think all estuaries are important, and I think the Onrus estuary is particularly important from a socio-economic perspective. While it may not harbour massive fish resources, it may not harbour any rare and endangered frogs and fish, it still is a very important estuary to local people. It's a very, very important recreation, socio-economic important site. It adds immense value to local properties, and it's important to a lot of people. And I think it's important that the system be looked after in a manner as best as we can. A little bit about the ecology of the system. It's a freshwater dominated estuary, which means it doesn't get strong marine influence, and that speaks to the fact that it's partially, the mouth is closed for portions of the time, so sometimes there's no marine influence. When the mouth is open, it's quite narrow, it's quite shallow, so there's not a huge amount of fresh water in there. Sorry, not a huge amount of salt water in there. And unfortunately, the fresh water that does come into the estuary is not great quality. It's loaded with nutrients from the agricultural areas upstream. There's also a lot of sediment, suspended solids in there. And from time to time, fecal coliforms, bacterial pollution from sewage spills in the estuary or in the river. Vegetation-wise, the estuary is, I don't know if I dare use the word infested, with extensive reed beds. Historically, there were always reed beds on the estuary. These have grown dramatically over time. Two reasons principally. One is because of their nutrient enrichment. Reeds like nutrients, and they grow fast when you have lots of nutrients. They also like shallow water sediment. So over the years, a lot of sediment has been washed down, settles in the estuary, and this enables the reeds to encroach from the banks. But reeds are also important. They're not just a nuisance. They provide important habitats for birds, they help to stabilize the banks, prevent erosion. They're also very useful in taking up nutrients out of the water, because without the reeds, you get microalgae or phytoplankton blooming, you get toxic algal blooms, and the estuary gets very messy. And there's a couple of other vegetation types in the estuary. I don't want to get into much detail there. The main one is the reeds. They are important, but yes, they have proliferated way beyond what they were like historically. Invertebrates, the corals that live in the water and the mud, we know very little about those. I think the last time anyone looked in detail at the estuary was back in 1979, and that was a kind of cursory survey, and they said there's some prawns and some crabs and maybe some amphipods. So no, we don't know a lot about those. Fish, to date, there's been several fish surveys of the estuary. We've recorded 11 species in the estuary. That's relatively low for an estuary in the southwestern Cape. Normally we're talking 20 to 30 species in an estuary like this. So it is low compared to other estuaries in the region. It does get better when the mouth's open. During open mouth conditions, we get a lot of marine species moving in there. They tend to dominate during those periods. But when the mouth has been closed for long periods of time, it tends to be dominated by what we call estuarine resident species. And freshwater species, those ones that are able to breed in the estuary. So, yes, the estuary is fulfilling basic ecological functions. It does have a purpose there. It is a useful estuary. It is of some conservation importance, but it may not be an outstanding importance. Birds. We've done, well, there has been quite a lot more work done on birds in the Onrus estuary over the years, several various surveys undertaken at various intervals of time. 81 species, that's pretty good, that's quite a high number of bird species. It's always been described as a sandy, or historically it was described as a sandy blackwater estuary, which means oligotrophic, low in nutrients, not much food for birds, great for water birds, but not really good for waders, those little birds that run around in the sand flats and the mud flats, breed in the Arctic tundra, come down here, feed during our austral summer, but never been particularly important for those species because of the limited tidal influence. Those birds like extensive tide flats, mud flats where they can feed at low tide and they go and roost in the reeds at high tide. So never great. There's a few alien species there. The mallards are problematic. They're hybridized with the yellow-billed ducks. And the rating, the last time we looked at the birds there, the estuary was rated as fair. Probably the birds are probably the most important biota community on the estuary. In terms of ecosystem services, again, Onrus estuary, not great in terms of goods and goods supplied. Subsistence value, in other words, the value of fish resources abstracted from there was never very good. It was rated at less than R500,000 when we did the assessment a few years ago. Yes, the reeds do provide an important service in terms of extracting nutrients from the water, but the main value of the estuary is in its tourism and recreational value, and also in terms of property value. The property, when we did quite a detailed study on property values in the Kuchelberg or the Overberg region many years ago, 2007, we looked at value of houses around the Onrus estuary, and we were able to establish that the estuary adds, in those days, somewhere in the order of 1.8 million to the value of the houses on the front row, 1.4 million to the next row, and slightly further as you go further and further back. So those numbers, probably you can treble them by now in terms of current day values. So being able to see, being close to the estuary is a great thing. It adds lots of value to property. And that's because it speaks, for me, that little picture on the bottom right there speaks volumes. That's what the Onrus estuary is about. It's recreational utility. It's an important place for people to swim, to enjoy, to spend their time. Human impacts on the Onrus estuary are extensive. First and foremost is the reduction in freshwater inflow to the estuary. We looked at this in 2016. We estimated that the estuary probably receives less than half of the fresh water that it received under natural conditions. And that's mostly linked to the De Bourse Dam, which was commissioned in 1976. A lot of the water from that dam goes off for agricultural use, for domestic use. There's also large numbers of farm dams in the catchment which take out water, which trap water, which would otherwise run down into the estuary. There's a lot of alien vegetation in the catchment. You heard John talking about that now. And that also uses up water that otherwise would have been available for the estuary. These things all impact significantly on the mean annual runoff, but particularly low flows. During summer, when the estuary so desperately needs the water, when there's little rainfall, those low flows are critically important for sustaining the ecology of the estuary. We also know that the environmental flow releases from the De Bourse Dam do not meet minimum requirements. Minimum requirements in terms of the ecological reserve, which you heard about just now. John spoke about a little bit about that. There's partly because the demand on water in the catchment, in the Overberg area, simply exceeds the supply. So they aren't able to leave enough water in the river. But also because the De Bosch Dam was built long before 1994, before we had before then the reserve was conceptualized. So the dam was never designed to release water for the environment. So now we're struggling to retrofit and trying to release water that in some way, but it's actually quite difficult. The lack of water in the estuary has many major negative consequences. One of the biggest is the lack of scouring, and which results in sediment building up in the estuary, poor water quality in the estuary, and that's linked to the agricultural runoff, the sewage spills, stormwater. Certainly, the recent floods we had last year have contributed massively to the build-up of sediment in the estuary. Historically, you would struggle to even swim across the estuary. Nowadays, you can probably walk without getting your knees wet across many parts of the estuary. There's an enormous amount of sediment that has washed down from the catchment into the estuary and really has negatively impacted the health of the system. I'm hugely concerned what's going to happen next winter when we get more rain, more floods. The catchment, the peak beds are very, very unstable. They're under great risk, and all of that sediment is going to come down and land up in the estuary. Urban development has also contributed to negative impacts on the estuary. You see there's a lot of houses built very close in the floodplain, in the estuarine functional zone. It's had its impact. And there are also a lot of alien species we get in the estuary, alien plants, birds, fish, that are having their own impacts. John spoke at length about the environmental reserve. In 2016, we were involved in what was known as a classification study for the Breda Gerrits water management area. Onrus estuary falls into that water management area. We looked at the ecological reserve for the Onrus estuary. And what that means is looking firstly at the health of the system as it is in its present state, comparing that to what it was like in what we call the reference or the natural state, and saying how good or bad is the state of the estuary at present. And then the next step in that process is to determine what should be the recommended ecological category for that system. And the recommended ecological category gives consideration to the conservation importance of the system and the socio-economic importance of the system. So in the case of the Onrus estuary, we acknowledge it's not a hugely important system from a biodiversity conservation perspective, but it is important from a socio-economic perspective. And when we look at the health of the system, we look at a whole lot of different components. The first four speak to physico-chemical aspects of the system. The last one speak to the biological importance of the system. And each of those aspects we interrogate based on whatever information we can, and we give them a score out of 100. So it's like being back at school. For hydrology, that's water flow, we gave it a score of 48. And that's linked to the fact that we actually lost half of the water, that's the fresh water flowing down into the system. Hydrodynamics and mouth condition, well, the mouth closes more frequently now than it used to because it hasn't got the fresh water flow to keep that mouth open. So, but it's actually surprisingly better than we really expected at the time. Water quality, not great, 56%. And physical habitat alteration, there's been quite a lot of development in the catchment in the estuary itself, so that wasn't a great, but we still passed at South African standards. Habitat, physical habitat, if you average all those together, you get a score of 60. And if we look at the biota are much worse condition than the physical aspects of the estuary. The algae, 40%, very high, very low score because of the high nutrient levels. Macrophytes, the vegetation low, invertebrates low, fish low, birds, as I said, probably the best of the lot, 65%. But overall, biotic health, we gave it a 52, and altogether, put it together, you get a score of 56 out of 100, which is, yes, we passed on South African standards, but I'm not sure that's good enough. That translates to what we call a D category. You saw the categories John put up earlier, and that, I'm sorry, I made a mistake there, that should be largely modified. So in 2016, when we evaluated the system, it's legally compliant with the National Water Act that says that no water resource should be in a category below a D, largely modified. Extensively modified category E is technically not allowed. And then the next thing we did was we said, what should the recommended category for the system be? And we agreed, given the importance and the demands of water in this catchment, we can't realistically expect to go much above a category D. So we said, fine, keep it in a category D, but don't let it decline from that point. And we said, and this is a page out of the Government Gazette, these are what we call resource quality objectives. That says, for each of those parameters we scored health on here, they appear in the column on the left-hand side there, and there are requirements for each of those. So we say, in order to maintain the estuary in a D quality, we need a certain amount of freshwater runoff to reach the estuary. If the freshwater flow drops below that point, then we are not confident that the estuary will remain in that D category. So very small at the top there are the months of the year, and it says that is the percentage of the natural mean, that's the natural monthly runoff the estuary needs to receive in order to maintain the estuary in that D category. And the next one down speaks to a whole of the water quality parameters. pH, nutrients, conductivity, salinity, oxygen, saying if you want to maintain this estuary in a D category, that's what you need to comply with. And the same goes for the birds, the fish, the invertebrates, the vegetation. There are a whole lot of narrative descriptions of what you need to do in order to keep the estuary in that D category. Unfortunately, I don't think we are in that D category anymore. And that's principally because you saw from the first presentation this morning that the amount of water being taken out of the Bosch Dam has increased. Surface water coming out of the Bosch Dam has increased quite dramatically over the years because the overstrand area is unable to meet its demands, requirements from groundwater. So they revert to surface water, which means estuary gets less water. So I'm not sure we're in the D category anymore. Something that I'm hoping we're going to be able to look at in the next couple of months and get an idea. The impacts of the flood, sediment deposition in the estuary has taken an enormous toll on the estuary. And I'm pretty sure that it would have knocked down the score of the health score quite a lot. Also, very briefly, we were tasked with producing an estuary management plan for the Onrus estuary. This was produced in 2016. It says draft for comment because it's been in draft format ever since. It has been taken a very long time, but I'm pleased to say that this is about to be gazetted, formally published as a formal document. Onrus estuary management plan. It says dated 2022, but I believe it's coming out this year as a formal requirement, and it sets out how the estuary should be managed. And in that document, there's a vision. Many of you, when I was standing, I think on this stage, talking about vision and workshopping a vision, what do you want the Onrus estuary to look like going forwards? And we agreed that the Onrus estuary is a healthy, functioning ecosystem with good water quality and is safe for recreational use, contributes positively to local sense of place, and together with the sandy beach at the estuary mouth is effectively managed for the benefit of future generations. I think that's quite a neat vision, and I think that's what we should still be striving for here. I'm not sure we're achieving that vision, but if we can, I know there's been an enormous amount of work, in spite of the fact that the estuary management plan has been in draft format for a long time. There have been a core group of people in this area, and I think you'll hear more about that just now, that have been working towards trying to achieve this vision by implementing the management plan. The management plan had a whole lot of objectives: improving estuary health, enhancing recreational utility, retaining sense of place, increasing awareness, and harmonious and effective governance. And in an effort to give effect to those objectives, we had a whole lot of management strategies. So the objectives are the ones in the circles, and the strategies are actions, the suites of actions which we devised together with stakeholders in this area that we felt would be required to be implemented in order to give effect to those goals and ultimately to achieve the vision for the estuary. And it looks like a bit of a spider diagram because any intervention you put in place tends to meet multiple objectives, and some activities require other activities to be implemented before they can become effective. So it's a kind of spidery diagram there. The estuary management plan will be published formally soon, so you can have a look at that in more detail. And then into the detail of the management plan, for each management, we had a series of what we call management action plans, and for each objective, there were the strategies. So there's 1, 2, 3 strategies here, seeking to meet the objective of improving estuary health. And it said, these are the actions that form part of those strategies, and these are the deliverables we expect to see. If you implement these actions, we expect to see these deliverables, and these are the responsible people who should be implementing those actions. So it was quite a neat management plan. It had everything there, and there has been a considerable effort to try and implement that management plan. And this runs over several pages. I'm just showing you one example of one objective which is seeking to meet that vision of having a nice, beautiful estuary here. We also had a zonation plan in the management plan. It still is. The zonation plan is still in the management plan. And we agreed that there should be different levels of protection in the estuary. The highest level of protection we recommended for this bird sanctuary on the eastern side of the estuary. And then there were lower levels of protection for the remainder of the estuary. And then this riparian buffer zone, which is the upper reaches of the estuary. And then we recommended some low-intensity recreational use area at the top of the estuary and some medium-intensity or higher-intensity use areas. That's why we felt that would facilitate the balance between utilization and conservation. And each of those zones had a description as to what we expect, what we envision in that zone, the purpose of that zone, and the goals of that zone, what are we hoping to achieve with that zonation, and then the guidelines applicable to each zone. What should you be allowed or not allowed to do in each of those zones, which would ensure that those zones, the management plan, achieve the desired objectives of the estuary. So, as I say, this is about to be published, better late than never. Formally adopted, signed into law by provincial government. It will become a legal binding document that municipality can then use to budget. So no government department can budget for things that are not in their plan, not in their IDP, not in their STP. Sorry, no, that's something else. SDF. Sustainable Development Framework. So now, with a formally adopted, gazetted management plan, it means the municipality can then seek funding from national government, from provincial government, to implement the plan. So, yes, I think it's great. However, I think that given recent developments, it's probably time to update the plan. But there's many good elements here. I think so, anyway. I hope you do too. But there are many good positive elements in that management plan, and if they're implemented, we will see an improvement in the health, and we will see restoration of the health of the estuary. And I think I've run out of time.